All right, ladies and gentlemen, day 16, episode 17 of 40 Days of 4VKM, and episode 17, the name of the title, it is Juan O Savin Defeats the nWo. It was released on 2/1/2021. 21. So real quick, before we get started into this, update yesterday, I dropped the special report, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, accused of human trafficking. And you can watch that to see my thoughts, my opinion on that. One of the things I said in the video was, you haven't seen Vince McMahon resign from TKO WWE, at least not yet, is what I said. And sure enough, last night during SmackDown, Vincent Kennedy McMahon has resigned from TKO. Now, he also released a statement, a very adamant, very strong statement, really reiterating what his spokesperson said the day before, which is there's a ton of lies in this lawsuit, and he looks forward to vigorously defending himself. And more importantly, he looks forward to clearing his name. So, does it look like he's going to settle on this one? I'd be surprised if he did. Not going to say not a possibility. There's some interesting things with that. You had also, came out yesterday after I recorded the video, that the building that he was staying in, that he lives in, that he met this woman at, was Trump Park, Stamford. It is a Trump org property managed by the Trump organization, and they changed the name a couple of years ago. The residents voted to remove Trump's name from the building, so they did that. But you have Trump and McMahon there again, boom, in this thing, and then you have people like the New York Post trying to point it together, like, oh, look, Trump and McMahon, right? What have I been saying for 4 years? Trump and McMahon working together for a very long time, right? So, highly recommend, go back, watch the episode yesterday, so you don't have to comment in this video. Oh, you going to talk about the Vince McMahon thing? Yeah, I talked about it yesterday. I even talked about it right now. So, moving on, we're going to get back to the regularly scheduled program. It's Royal Rumble Day, and I'm wearing my Hacksaw Jim Duggan shirt. Got to meet him one time out at one of my WrestleMania trips, I think in California. Amazing guy, amazing family, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So shout out to him. He was the first Royal Rumble winner ever. So Royal Rumbles today. Hope you guys enjoy it. I know it's one of my favorite nights of the year. So let's see what happens. Hopefully there's some big surprises. All right. So 2/1/21. What was going on 2/1/21 or around that time? You had Joe Biden now. He's in as your resident of the United States. This is one of my favorite videos to go back and look at. Whenever I'm feeling, like, is there anything happening? What's going on? I just go back and I watch this video and I realize, man, they really, there's a lot of weird stuff that happened around that inauguration date, right? So the video starts off, it's President Trump when he gave his message on 1/6. Hopefully that misses the YouTube censors. But on 1/6, he gave his message standing out in front of the White House. And he was basically saying, I understand you guys are all upset, rightfully so. But you need to disperse. You need to go in peace. You need to peacefully go home. Now, what's interesting is, I talked about this one in the last videos, there's a lot of talk around this time about the Insurrection Act, right? Remember, people were going, remember Mike Lindell was filmed with the notes that said Insurrection Act on it, and just conveniently the camera picked it up and you could zoom in, you could see Insurrection Act. I think it was Mike Lindell when he was going to visit the White House. Patrick Byrne, I believe, also. They were all encouraging President Trump to put in the Insurrection Act because of the voter fraud that we all suspected happened during the 2020 election. So we get to that date, and President Trump is telling everybody to go home in peace. And what's interesting about that is if you were to sign the Insurrection Act, then you would have to do that. You would have to, part of the Insurrection Act is you have to announce to everybody, go home peacefully, right? Or something along those lines. So find that interesting because you can check the box there, right? So, we don't know for sure if he did or not. A lot of people said he didn't. But let's look at what else happened on that day, right? So, good follow on X is the Rubber Duck. And he's been talking a lot the last couple days about 11/3. Now, yesterday in the news, you saw E. Jean Carroll. So the same day Vince McMahon resigns because of his hush money scandal, E. Jean Carroll gets a crazy, ridiculous ruling in her favor, saying that Trump has to pay her $83.3 million. That ain't going to happen, but keep dreaming, you psychos. So, 83.3. Some people can interpret that as 11.3, right? And when you look at 11.3 in the drops, 11.3 is a very specific marker. Now, what else was 11.3? 11.3 was the date of the 2020 election, the last election, right? So, you have 11.3, you have 83.3 pops up. Some people are saying, is this the marker that we've been looking for? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not, right? But highly recommend go check out the Rubber Duck. He has a lot to say on 11.3. If you look at his post from yesterday, he breaks it down multiple ways. So check that out for sure. Now, 11.3, when you look at the Law of War Manual, which that came up recently in the news because you had people kind of warning Israel, like, hey, with the whole Gaza situation, you got to follow the Law of War Manual, right? That's kind of like the international code for the international rules for warfare, in terms of protecting civilians and, what happens. So 11.3 in the Law of War Manual is the end of occupation, right? So it's when a belligerent force loses control and they are out of power. They're forced out either by a rebellion or whatever the case be. So so it's another interesting thing. You have 11.3, that's the day of the election. Is that the marker? Then you have the 11.3 in the Law of War Manual. What's going on with all this? Who knows? Now, a couple of the weird anomalies when Biden got in that people pointed out right away is the window panes in the White House, in the Oval Office. They were different, right? So, I mean, in a matter of a day, they changed the window panes out. So a lot of people kind of point that out. You can find videos or pictures of that. But it was just one of those strange instances, right? I was on the Conspiracy Horseman. Remember, we talked about that the other day. And GGP, he asks me, he goes, do I think Joe Biden will ever become the president, right? So this was December. This is while all the, stuff was being talked about. And I said, no, I don't think there's any way in which Joe Biden becomes president of the United States. And I stand by that because I don't think Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Now, people could call me crazy, delusional, whatever the case be, but I don't think that's Joe Biden, and I don't think he's got the authority or the true powers of the president of the United States, right? What's interesting, President Trump very recently had made a statement saying how, something along the lines of like, all of this stuff had to happen while Joe was in. It couldn't happen while he was in, right? Because then he'd be taking a beating right now. So it's almost like, the controlled demolition of the corporation is happening under Joe Biden's watch. And it's almost like this situation with Joe Biden is being used to really wake up the normies of like, hey, this isn't, what the hell is going on to our country right now, especially when you take a look at, what's going on with the border. That's waking a lot of people up. When you look at how he got out of Afghanistan, that kind of woke a lot of people up. And you can just kind of go on and on. The guy's off his rockers, right? So it's very interesting. So the three things I talk about is that there's really three options here on what is it going to take for President Trump to get back into office, right? You have the judicial process, where you had the legislative process first. That didn't work because, you know, they confirmed him at the Congress on January 6th. You had the judicial process, the lawsuits. Most of the lawsuits didn't have standing, right? So they didn't get into court, and it seems to be only the lawsuits where the people who were yelling voter fraud, now they were getting sued, and then now that evidence is getting introduced, like I talked about a couple episodes ago in Georgia, how they were able to hack into a Dominion voting machine on right in front of I believe a federal judge, so, and change the vote tallies with just a pen, right? So that's kind of what everybody was saying, all these things, and it's like now you just have to wait for it to come out in court. Well, how else do you introduce evidence? Kind of like my man Vince McMahon. How else are you gonna introduce evidence? You know, he could have avoided this whole situation if he just finished paying the $3 million hush money payment, right? But for some reason, he decided to stop. So, did Vince McMahon want to go to trial? Did he want to go to court? He seems pretty motivated to clear his name. So, let's see what happens, right? So, another fun thing that comes up in this video is you have NBC News. And if you remember, I believe it was NBC News when they were doing the debate or the town hall with President Trump. And they asked him about QAnon. And, you know, he's like, I don't know anything about QAnon, but I hear they really like me, and they really love our country, So, we show a clip of a young man, big fan of this guy. He's wearing a red hat, and they're asking him, like, well, you know, what did you think is going to happen? What, you know, talk to us about this Q stuff. And he's like, well, you know, I think there's a storm coming, and it could come any day now. Any day. And that's kind of, I mean, how most of us feel, right? And he even mentions, you know, we're under the belief that potentially Q might be JFK Jr. And she asked the question that GGP asked me on the Conspiracy Horseman, do you think JFK Jr. is still alive? And he says, something in my heart tells me yes. And same, brother, same, right? And I told GGP the same thing. I think he's alive as well. And, you know, it's interesting how people act all shocked about that statement, right? GGP didn't act all shocked, but, you know, people act all crazy. Oh, you know, he died in a plane crash, right? And then, you know, the other question that I'll get is, you know, why would he do it? What incentive does he have to fake his own death, right? And that's really an uneducated question if you think about it. I don't know. You could look at the FBI declassified documents regarding JFK Jr. There was a plot to kidnap him at one point. He was informed about that plot. It's the same documents where he says Joe Biden is a traitor. Now, a lot of people construe that and say, oh, Joe Biden was behind the plot to kidnap JFK Jr. I don't think that's the case. If you look at that letter that he posted, it was on 8/26/1994, and give or take a day or two before that is when Joe Biden's crime bill got passed, right? And a lot of people that are close to JFK Jr. have gone out on the record to say that crime bill pissed him off, right? So when you have that context, just look at the dates, 8/26, you know, day or two beforehand. I don't think it had anything to do with Joe Biden trying to kidnap. I just think it was part of the FBI declassified letters that had come out with that. But anyway, you know, this reporter goes, even though he died in a plane crash. And, you know, so again, there's definitely a motive to do it. Whether or not it happened or not, I guess we'll find out, right? So, you know, we talk about Biden getting in, right? And he just looks silly sitting at his little desk wearing his little mask here. You know, so you can't really see who's behind there. And we talked about the Law of War manual. We also have the National Guard, right? So you have, I believe it's, Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos. He's interviewing, what's this guy's name? Wallace, I think is his last name. But anyway, gentlemen, you see it in the video. He is basically talking about all the troops that have come in to lock down D.C. throughout the inauguration process. And this was on MLK Day. I remember that. So he says a very interesting line in that interview. He's the commanding officer, right? And he said, I'm so proud of the thousands of National Guard and airmen and all this stuff that have come to D.C. to ensure a smooth transition to military power. He says this, right? Now, George Stephanopoulos goes, oh, okay, thank you, sir, right? But I don't know if George Stephanopoulos really realized what was going on with that. But he says, clearly, in the interview, he goes, we are transitioning to military power. He doesn't say we're transitioning to the Biden administration. We're transitioning to military power, right? So, I don't know. And when you looked at it, Washington, D.C. looked like a fortress, right? You have gates all up. You have troops everywhere. There's something going on there. You see Biden in his motorcade in D.C. that first day when he's in his inauguration. And you have all the National Guard troops with their back turned to him, right? And their back turned to him. And, they're supposed to show support to the commander-in-chief, right? So I write, hail to the chief. Now, funny little sync with that. WWE, they had a segment with Stephanie McMahon. At the time, she was in The Authority. And Roman Reigns, who's, I talked about him. He's the longest reigning WWE Universal Champion of this time frame, right? Of this modern era. And Roman Reigns turns his back to Stephanie. And she's saying, don't turn your back to me. Don't turn your back on me, right? And, it's fun when you line that up with the Joe Biden and them turning their back to him. Now, what do I put in this clip? I put, hail to the chief. And it just so happens that a couple years later, I want to say it was 2-3 years, it was definitely last year, I think. It's either the same day of the video or same day of the inauguration. I'd have to go back and figure out which date it was. But it was a delta that lined up almost perfectly with this video. And it was WWE SmackDown. Roman Reigns is now known as the Tribal Chief, right? And what did they hold on SmackDown? It was a Hail to the Chief ceremony. Wow, right? So don't turn your back on Roman like the National Guard turned their back on JB, right? So one of the other things I showed you earlier on in the video is in the transition process from Trump to Biden, you had the Pentagon stopped, intelligence briefings to Joe Biden before he got in. That's kind of interesting, right? The other thing that they did is that they did not provide a government plane for him to get to D.C., which they always do, right, when there's a new president coming in. So I found that very interesting as well. You want to know what else is interesting is look at some of the pictures of Joe Biden getting off Air Force One. Compare those to some of the pictures of President Trump and other presidents getting off Air Force One. There's a lot of, weird stuff there. But it's interesting to say the least, right? So you have the resident now in, Joe Biden, president of the bankrupt United States Corporation. And then, who knows? Maybe you have a commander-in-chief outside the system that is kind of leading this military power. Because it seems like, the guy came on television, national television, ABC, and said, we're transitioning to military power. So, we have Juan O Savin that kind of narrates some different parts about this. He talks about Popcorn Day, which we just had a week ago, which was 119, the mirror of 9/11. That, I believe, is when the intelligence review was due post-election, by Ratcliffe, right? And that was late at the end of the day, and it was stonewalled by, looks like, the intelligence community, so it would be late. But if you recall, in 2018, President Trump had an executive order that really was to safeguard our elections. And when you go back and read that executive order, it almost gives you the blueprint of how they were going to do 2020. And again, you got to ask yourself, how did they know? How did they know what was going to happen in the future? Because all of the accusations about the 2020 election, they're all outlined in that 2018 executive order about election integrity. So highly recommend go back and read that executive order. You're going to think that came out after the 2020 election. It didn't. It came out, and I want to say 2018 by President Trump, and I don't believe it was ever overturned by JB. So we talk about Juan O Savin. Juan O Savin, 107, right? Now, when I think about 107 and wrestling, I was trying to think about like what could connect to was there any 107s in wrestling? And one of the most iconic scenes and nights in matches in professional wrestling history was Goldberg in WCW. This was before they were owned by the WWE. But Goldberg on July 6th, I want to say, July 6th or July 9th, 1998, WCW Nitro was in town for in Atlanta, Georgia, right? Goldberg is from Atlanta, Georgia. Goldberg played on the Atlanta Falcons. His number was 71. Think mirror, right? You got a 17 there. Pop a 0 in there, you got a 107. So, at this point in Goldberg's career, he was undefeated. And going into this night, he was 106-0. And he gets a title match, right? He gets a title match. The champion at the time is Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Now, if you remember, talked about this in Rodman World Peace episode, these guys were going on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. This is the same year JFK Jr. was on with Jay Leno, right? They were talking about, they brought Rodman up, then Rodman was in wrestling. Hogan drops the belt at this point, so then Leno can come in, do his match thing that he did. So Hogan wasn't the champ at the time. Goldberg was the champ. And so it was very interesting. So remember, we were talking about the nWo. So 107 defeats the nWo. The nWo was the group, and Hulk Hogan who was always the good guy. He switches over to be the bad guy for the first time in his career. He becomes Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and he dresses all in black, and he's just the most hated guy ever in wrestling at this point, right? He joins up with two guys, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. They form the New World Order. So the New World Order is one of the hottest things in WCW. Hollywood Hulk Hogan is the champion. Goldberg is the United States champion. So that's an important fact. And generally, when you're the United States champion, you become the number one contender for the World Heavyweight Championship. At least that's how WCW used to do it. So they're not going to make it easy for Goldberg, right? They're going to try to stop him before he gets to Hollywood. And I believe there's a stipulation on that show that Goldberg would have to beat Scott Hall, also in the nWo. He'd have to beat Scott Hall before he could get to Hulk Hogan. So he beat Scott Hall. And he had to do it in the same night, right? So he beat Scott Hall. Scott Hall's got the nWo on his trunks. And Goldberg hits him with a spear, tip of the spear, right? So Goldberg hits him with the spear, a jackhammer, right? And he gets win number 107. So it was the 107th victory that secured his match with Hollywood Hogan, which he then later on went on to compete, and then he defeated Hollywood Hulk Hogan to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship at 108, right? So 107 and 108 defeated the nWo. 17 and 18, defeated the nWo, right, in one night. So I always thought that was a little fun little thing. And as I started looking at these Goldberg connections, I'm like, wow, I wonder if there's anything else there. So, eventually the WWF buys WCW, and through, the years afterwards, a lot of the WCW guys start coming over to the WWF or WWE now. And Goldberg was one of them. So Goldberg finally gets over, and he spends just 1 year in the WWE. He wasn't really getting along with everybody, and he was a WCW guy now in the WWE, so there's a little tension there. And, he was a big star, right? So big stars, generally big egos, right? And Goldberg's last match is in 2004 at WrestleMania 20. And I've covered this in episodes past. Who else was at WrestleMania 20? It was Donald J. Trump. This is the WrestleMania for Madison Square Garden, where they're there, and Jesse the Body Ventura is interviewing Trump. They're talking about, will you support me for president? They're talking presidencies there, and the date of this WrestleMania was 3/14. 3/14, add them up. You get a, what do you get? You get a 17. Wow, right? So you got another 17 there. You have Trump there at this WrestleMania. So Goldberg, that's his last match, right? And it was also Brock Lesnar's last match. They were, at that point at least, they were facing off in what would really be a dream match, but the wrestling fans knew that they were leaving, right? So at that point, the fans weren't very happy with either of them. Goldberg was supposed to be the good guy, but they were both getting booed because the fans knew that both of these guys were leaving because their heart wasn't in it anymore, right? So they didn't get the best reaction, and it wasn't a great match as a result of this either. So anyway, you had WrestleMania 20, and then Goldberg goes away. And I show you a clip. Paul Heyman. Talked about this before, right? Haman, the 17th book of the Bible, the book of Esther. And Purim, right? The Purim story. And Haman was kind of like the bad guy and all that, right? So you have this guy, Paul Heyman. He's usually the mouthpiece for the beast, Brock Lesnar, right? And he's kind of telling this story all these years later of Goldberg coming back to the WWE, right? So when did Goldberg come back to the WWE? He came back in November 2016. Was there anything else going on in November 2016? I don't know. But he comes back. I believe it's in Colorado. It's right before the Survivor Series, a couple weeks before that. A lot of stuff happens at the Survivor Series, right? And you have the governor of Colorado, who's a Democrat and friends with Goldberg. I'm probably going to screw his name up. John Hickenlooper or something like that. Hickenlooper, right? But anyway, he's in the front row chanting Goldberg, cheering Goldberg on as Goldberg makes his return after 12 years, I believe it is. 12 years into the wilderness, as Paul Heyman says in his interview there. So you have Goldberg come back, and he kind of challenged, Brock Lesnar, I think, challenges him. They end up having a match at Survivor Series that year. So Goldberg comes out of retirement. Nobody really knows what to expect. Brock Lesnar at this point he's a beast, literally. He's beaten everybody. He ended The Undertaker's undefeated streak 2 years before. He's just a guy nobody can take out, right? And remember, the last match that they had was that WrestleMania match in 2004. So Goldberg's last match is also going to be his first match back, right? And to the shock of many in this match, Goldberg hits him spear, jackhammer. He beats the beast, Brock Lesnar. He slays the beast in record time, 1 minute and 26 seconds, right? 1 minute, 26 seconds. 126. What is 126 in gematria? It's Juan O Savin. Wow. 107. There it is again, right? Now, at the same time, Juan O Savin, he's coming out with his social media website, 107 Daily. So I'm showing you all these 107 Daily clips while we're talking about Goldberg. I remember people commenting in this, oh my God, Juan O Savin is Goldberg? No, I'm not saying Juan O Savin is Goldberg, right? I'm just saying it's a nice little parallel sync right there as we continue to tell this story. So Goldberg beats Brock Lesnar in historic fashion, 1:26. And Goldberg has the second run in WWE where it really was a good run. I mean, generally legends don't get a lot of good runs, especially after they retired. But, there's an interview that Goldberg gave, and I want to say it was 2016, a couple weeks before he returned to WWE. I believe it was with ESPN. Jonathan Coachman, I think, the coach. And they asked him, hey, when was the last time you spoke to Vince McMahon? And he says he hadn't spoke to Vince McMahon since he left the WWE, which was on 3/14/17, right? 2004. So you have Goldberg hasn't spoken to Vince in all these years. But you know who he did speak to? Donald J. Trump. Because Goldberg ended up on The Apprentice. Which I had no idea. I didn't really watch The Apprentice. I only have time to watch wrestling, right? So, but sure enough, Rodman was on The Apprentice. A lot of people were in it. And you have Goldberg on The Apprentice, right? And he ended up getting fired by Donald J. Trump. You fired. So, Goldberg fired by Trump on Apprentice. And now you have it kind of come all full circle. So He's doing this interview. Somebody else asks him, I think TMZ, they're like, hey, tell us the differences between Vince McMahon and Donald Trump. And he's like, they're basically the same people. And that's kind of funny because, remember that parallel timeline I laid out between Trump and McMahon and how they hit him with all the same charges and accusations all the time? They're basically the same people. Or as I like to say, public enemy number one and public enemy number two. But you have, these portraits, right? Trump would have this portrait of him looking all manly in his house. Vince has the same portrait of himself looking all manly in his house, right? A couple of alpha males, right? So, he kind of says right there, they go way back. Trump was a wrestling fan going all the way back to the 80s, and they have a relationship and a connection that just goes for a very long time, right? So, Goldberg ends up becoming Universal Champion. And there's an interesting pathway to that. The Universal Championship was a belt created in 2016. I want to say 16 or 17. It's 16, I think. And I always found it interesting because Universal is the parent company of the network that WWE was on, right? NBC Universal. You have the Universal Championship now, right? So what else happened around this time that the video came out? A couple weeks before this. It was announced that NBC had purchased the rights to the WWE network, and they were going to move it to Peacock, right? And it was going to be over $1 billion. And how many hours of footage was it that they had acquired? What do you guys think, if you had to guess? Yep, that's right. 17,000 hours of footage that they acquired. And we're going to move from the WWE network to Peacock. So another huge business deal for WWE. Stock goes through the roof because they're making all this money. And, business is good. They got the Universal Championship now. They are, proudly throughout Universal properties. And it's all good. So how does Goldberg get the Universal Championship? Well, at the time, Kevin Owens is the Universal Championship. And he's in a program with Chris Jericho. And this is leading up to WrestleMania 33 in Orlando. And Kevin Owens is the Universal Champion. He turns on his friend Chris Jericho and, roughs him up pretty bad. Jericho had the list, right? So, you just made the list used to be his saying there. And now it's kind of funny because we wait for the Epstein list to come out. So every time somebody's named on the Epstein list, I say, you just made the list, right? But you have Chris Jericho. He comes out. First of all, he makes the match for Goldberg. He basically challenges Goldberg or accept the challenge of Goldberg for Kevin Owens. And Kevin Owens didn't like that, so that's why he turns on him in the story. And you don't see Jericho until the match, Goldberg versus Kevin Owens. And then Jericho's music hits. break the walls down. You have Jericho come out. He just stands there. Kevin Owens gets distracted. Spear, jackhammer. Goldberg is the Universal Champion now, right? So it's very interesting. Now, going back to Chris Jericho, I've always been a Chris Jericho fan. That scene where you see me in after Linda McMahon on Monday Night Raw in 2001, I'm wearing a Chris Jericho jersey. That was my guy back in the day, right? So big Chris Jericho fan. He did a lot of stuff when he returned in 2007. There, 27 JFK, right? It's also the year that Trump McMahon fought at WrestleMania, and it's also the year that Mr. Kennedy won the Money in the Bank. But anyway, Chris Jericho comes back in 2007, and they're showing all these promos before his return. It's like Second Coming. It's all coded stuff, right? It actually uses gematria, right? It also uses some Roman numerals. So there's some different things to decode, and everybody's trying to decode what it means, right? It ends up being Chris Jericho. As I go through and I pause through some of those clips of those promo videos that were kind of hyping his return, there's some interesting messages that when you pause, you see, some weird stuff. And you see some weird dates. You see a 7, hidden date, and then kind of like a 9-9. So they're talking about something that happened in July 99. If you pause it at other spots, you'll see Coast Rescue. I thought that was weird. And then they're talking about a second coming, right? So somebody who hasn't been around, they're coming back, right? So very interesting to say the least. I show you here Chris Jericho. He's a Trump guy. He's a Trump supporter. His wife was all about, what was going on with the election. He even made a statement on like, I think it's, is it that crazy that it's taking this long to count votes or something like that? People jumped on him on that because for some reason, as we're learning with this Vince McMahon thing, at some point, wrestling fans became very soft, very sensitive, and very social justice mindset, which I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what year that happened. I'll probably talk about that in one of the podcast episodes we do. But I don't know what happened. You have all these sensitive wrestling fans now jumping on Chris Jericho because he's a Trump supporter. So what? He's a Trump supporter. It's America last time I checked. And you get to like who you like for politics. So anyway, Chris Jericho has Don Trump Jr. on his podcast, right? They do a nice little podcast together, right? And around the time of this whole, Biden-Trump post-election situation, you had a bunch of people that were taking part in a Jericho march. So break the walls down, right? Jericho in the Bible. What did they do? They all marched around the walls of Jericho and they made noise and basically the vibrations and whatnot took the walls down, right? So they were trying to recreate that. I thought that is interesting. Donald Trump Jr. is meeting with Jericho. You have the Jericho March going on, right? So it's fun at the end of the day, right? So that's about it. We end off Goldberg, Universal Champion. We love it. He held that until WrestleMania 33 when he lost it again to Brock Lesnar. And the Beast becomes the champion. This was in 2017. So it's fun at the end of the day. Highly recommend. Go back, watch this episode. Juan O Savin defeats the nWo. And look into some of that stuff. Look into the Law of War manual. Check out Rubber Duck as he was talking about 11.3 on X. Look at some of the anomalies in the pictures between Joe Biden's White House and Donald Trump's White House. I forgot to mention a very important fact. Castle Rock, right? Castle Rock were the producers of Seinfeld. They were the production company that was part of Seinfeld. It had gone away, went out of business, and then they reopened right in this transitional period from Trump to Biden, right? They reopened. It's Rob Reiner's company. And what does Castle Rock Studios, what are they famous for? They're famous for a Oval Office set, a White House set, right? So there's a couple different movie sets that they've replicated to look like the White House. So, because they can't just go use the White House when they need to make movies about the White House. They need to have sets and whatnot, right? So, just so happens, Castle Rock Studio had one of the better Oval Office sets. So, I wonder what happened to that Oval Office set. I don't know if we'll ever find out, but it's interesting to say the least. So, check out the video. 107 defeats the nWo on Rumble. Don't forget to subscribe to the 4VKM podcast on YouTube. This podcast is going to be fire now, especially if we're getting updates about the trial of Vince McMahon. I hope he goes to trial on this. He says he wants to clear his name, so we're going to cover it for you as he does. And 4VKM.com for all the other episodes. Check them out. As always, enjoy the show and enjoy the Royal Rumble tonight as well.